6 months ago, I made a video about Mecha BREAK, an online multiplayer 6v6 mech game. And those are not very common. So it immediately seemed interesting to me. I checked it out and I had a lot of really good stuff to say about the game. And as a live service connoisseur and person who incessantly complains about bad live service games, those good things were primarily focused on the fact that it's a really good game to play in a very interesting niche. We don't get a lot of mech games, and the unique part about Mecha BREAK was how much it was committing to the fantasy of actually being a mech pilot and structuring all of its gameplay around that idea. Fast forward 6 months into the future, we are now at the open beta. The game has launched on Xbox as well, and Amazing Seasun Games reached out to sponsor me checking out the improvements that they've had and their new mode. Now, did they know that I already said a lot of good things? I don't know, but let me tell you, it's a really easy sponsorship to take when somebody's like, hey, you want to make a video on that game that you really liked already and made a video on? So here we are. Maybe don't tell them. So yes, Mecha BREAK is still a pretty unique game that has a lot of cool stuff going for it. I found myself playing this open beta to get footage for this video and accidentally ended up playing for 20 hours just because I was having a good time risk queuing into more matches. It's just the truth. But back then, I had some complaints, I had some concerns, and I wanted to jump in, see what had changed, see the new mode, and see if some of those things had been addressed and how the game has been progressing. So, hi, I'm Mug, and if you're new here, welcome. And if you're not new here, welcome back. You're looking great. It's really good to see you. As always, remember to hit the like button if you like the video. All the usual stuff helps the channel grow. But here's an updated look at Mecha BREAK. Now, Mecha BREAK can seem a little complicated on the surface, because last time around, it was only a 6v6 mech game in which you choose one of around 15 different mechs at the moment, and you lock them in. There can't be any duplicates on your team. Each mech is very specialized, very unique, and then you go into one of many different maps with objectives to complete, battling it out against another team of 6 mechs. In that context, you might have looked at it and said, oh, it's like a hero shooter, but with mechs. But you have to keep in mind that with mechs is a really big modifier to the whole thing. Each of the different maps that you play on has their own objective, be that capture specific points, escort an objective, retrieve something, kind of a bit like a capture the flag. They're all very different from the terrain perspective, and a lot of the strategy is modified by them, but it's always objective based except for the one map that is just straight up elimination team deathmatch. Up to here, that might not sound very original, but it's the impact of playing mechs that turns everything on its head. It's technically, if you want to call it that, a third-person shooter, but a lot of what goes on in Mecha BREAK is very unique to the mecha genre. All of the mechs are just very different, be that more agile, melee-focused skirmishers, big melee-focused bruisers, very long-range, sit-down type of tanks, very stand-in-the-middle-of-a-fight type of tanks, supports, ranged planes that fly around and turn into snipers but are very fragile. There's a lot going on, and each of them feels very unique and very much tailored to a mech fantasy. I mean, you can see it in the footage. The overall feel of boosting through a map, flying around, taking position, and this dance of mechs flying and shooting at each other and using a lot of the equipment to scramble the lock-on and then dashing in to start a melee attack and parrying with a shield. It's not very common that we see this sort of stuff in a lot of multiplayer games, and that's what really makes it stand out. I personally fell down a very big mech rabbit hole after Armored Core 6 and ended up watching quite a bit of Gundam and just really liking mechs. And as a mech enjoyer, I enjoy Mecha BREAK, and it is because I get to play as Welkin and run around and chop people down with my energy axe, and it's really fun. Or when I lose, here's a small tip for any of you who are going to be playing the game. I just switch to Pinaka the next match and always win because people don't pick supports despite them being incredibly strong. And I still get to fulfill a lot of my mech fantasy when I play Pinaka, so I'm not going to complain. But speaking of that, there is quite a lot of strategy and differences in overall gameplay here. Because you're playing giant mechs, and the scale of everything is at that size, time to kill is generally very long. Skirmishes and battles can be very drawn out with a lot of strategy and opportunity for counterplay against your opponent as you're waiting for cooldowns to come back, or trying to calculate your reload, or as you nail a perfect parry to push them back. But there's also a lot of setting up and a lot of positioning because the game is so vertical, because everybody can fly. So a lot of the mechs being able to just be up in the air and being snipers or being support mechs that are up there changes the target priority in the middle of a match. And especially once a team is more organized, the idea of having a giant tank-like mech just sit down and, like, as an ability, pin themselves to the ground and set up big shields and start artillery bombing the enemy, and then having everybody focus this just immobile mech, but then they get support from one of the support mechs, and meanwhile that creates space for other mechs that are more specialized into displacing or getting into the backline and doing melee damage. It all flows well. It's fun to do as a game. It has strategy, but for me, the part that matters the most is that it just looks like a really cool mech battle. And while that might sound like there's a lot of stuff going on, and I do not think this game is particularly simple, every mech has multiple abilities. Often they have multiple modes, so they can go into plane mode or tank mode or things like that. And you're switching between a lot of different abilities. Some of these mechs are going to have up to 6 or 7 different abilities because they change when they go into one of those modes. That is part of the appeal for me. There is depth here of, you know, your weapons can attack enemies, but they have shields that block them, but melee attacks go through the shield and deal health damage. There are things like those parries, there's knocking people off balance. And overall, from the last time I played it, everything just feels a little bit more snappy, a little bit more refined, and just tuned a little bit better. Except supports. Supports are still incredibly strong. Just had to say, especially Pinnock. Overall, you might think that releasing a multiplayer live service game in 2025 is just a terrible idea at this point within games. But we've seen great successes even recently with stuff like Marvel Rivals. For me, the success of a game like this comes down to 2 very simple things. Does it have a niche in the market? And does it actually feel good to play? Does it have that connection to the gameplay, the visuals, the impact, the strategy that makes you want to hop in for one more match? And Mecha BREAK has a very specific niche in mech games that really nobody else is competing in. And on top of that, it really feels good. There's something about a lot of the melee strikes and the feedback on them, the hit stop, just a lot of what's going on here has you queuing for the next game, or wanting to try out a new mech and really learn their ins and outs and how you can use them on each of the maps. But if all of that weren't your cup of tea, they have now added an extraction mode. And I got some thoughts on this. Now, I've always been very interested in extraction modes, but I've never really found my groove with them. I think that the closest I've been to enjoying something like this has been when they are a side mode to a game that I already know. But in those cases, I encounter a very different problem. So to give you an example, when Call of Duty was trying out more stuff with Warzone and with their own extraction mode, I tried it out, but they just bolted so many different mechanics on top of what Call of Duty was. I would hop into that game to play with my loadouts and level my weapons, not to get into all of this armor stuff and mapping and side missions and weird stuff like that. The reason that I think mechs, which is the extraction mode in Mecha BREAK, works well is because it doesn't do that. It's just Mecha BREAK in a different environment. So the 6v6 multiplayer exists there, and the mechs extraction mode, they're both right there. And when you jump into mechs, everything is the same. There are some small mechanics that are added to it, including part of the loot progression that is exclusive to mechs, regarding weapons that you can call in and equip on any mech. And those are more or less balanced around kind of filling in the void of whatever your normal weapons for the mech are. But aside from those weapons, and there being a lot of PvE in mechs, as you take down different bases, different enemies, and you learn them, fight them with your team and loot, it's just Mecha BREAK. There's no real big crazy change to it, and when you end up in that extraction mode encountering a different squad as you try and extract, it just plays out like a multiplayer match, and therefore, if you're pretty good at multiplayer, you're gonna do really well in the extraction mode. In that sense, it might sound a bit weird to say, but it doesn't have the traditional hook of a lot of extraction modes and like getting overpowered gear and feeling like you're going to lose it all. And it feels a bit more like a PvPvE battle royale mode with the upside of maybe getting some cool loot on the way. And when you put those things together, it really fits in for me as a mode that if I were to play Mecha BREAK regularly with my friends, this is something I would hop into. Maybe I'm with my friends and we're more chatty that day, we're talking about problems in life or something, and we want something where we have more downtime to do the PvE and kind of chat without being super stressed in a multiplayer game. And we might jump into Moshmock and get interrupted by an enemy squad, have that moment of tension, and then just go back to chatting about life. The overall stakes of the mode are lower. The overall necessary learning that you have to do of its mechanics is way lower than most other extraction games or even other extraction modes in games, as I said before. And it just takes advantage of all of the systems, the great movement, the great weapon feel, and the mobility of the mechs that are in the game, and gives them another way of being enjoyed in that PvE mode, but with that extra twist of the extraction, the PvP stuff. And I'm not going to lie, I think that if Mecha BREAK had just a straight PvE mode, I would play a lot of it, because I just like playing with mechs. It's not that deep. So hey, this is a good compromise between all of that. Now, I will probably spend most of my time just in the 6v6 multiplayer because I enjoy it more. But it is a well done mode that I think is going to be appealing instead of taking away from the other main mode, depending on how you want to consider it. I think they coexist really well because of those design elements. Now, last time around that I spoke about Mecha BREAK, I had some complaints regarding customization and some questions about the progression. And I'm back to report that it is still pretty confusing in my opinion, but it does not worry me as much as before. Having put in quite a lot of time in getting a lot more loot in this session of Mecha BREAK than in my first, a lot of the loot is kind of inconsequential. As you play matches and progress battle passes and stuff like that, you're gonna get loot boxes, and in them there are modules that you can equip that basically come with one big pro and one big con, but in reality it's not that big of a deal. It'll be stuff like your energy regenerates faster, but jumping costs more energy. And the benefit is always like a percentage above whatever you get negative. So technically, if you mod stuff out, you can get a net like 3% bonus on something like your energy regen, or your ballistic defense versus your energy defense, or something like that. But at the end of the day in this game, I'm pretty sure, having put in quite a lot of time, that what matters is your overall skill, your positioning, your strategy, and this isn't something that's going to affect the outcome, at least what I've seen so far. If anything, I would like to see some of these mods be more extreme and just give me very large downsides and very big upsides to things so that I could tailor my playstyle more to what I like to do with each of my mechs, so that I have very, very clear weaknesses, but really strong benefits from that equipment. But that might actually become a nightmare to balance, so I get it. But so far, it's a nice thing to kind of slightly change stuff, but I had a tough time really feeling like those things impacted anything, and especially in the middle of a match, was basically imperceptible. But the other thing I commented on was customization, and some of it is now here. We get to see stuff like skins that are coming to the game, be that mech skins or weapon skins. We having a lot more visual customization of our mechs with tons of different paint jobs and gradients and really in-depth ways to customize the color of our mechs overall. And hopefully that's going to extend into pieces or specific weapons that we could have on them and have those customized as well. At the moment, there is no secondary loadouts for each of the mechs to like have a different primary weapon or a different secondary ability. And I do suspect that those things will be coming. That is something that I think could be really, really good for the game, is instead of having just like a huge list of mechs, is having a lot of the mechs in the game have other options for their loadouts, but at the same time that might not be in the cards. That is one of the differentiating factors of this sort of stuff, right? That this isn't a game where you build out your mech in order to have your perfect loadout. It is a game where you choose a specific mech that has a role to fulfill in battle and live out the fantasy of piloting that mech. But no matter which direction they go in, I'm pretty excited to see what they add, because currently in this form of the game, there are exactly 13 mechs, and I like all of them basically. Between my previous play session and this one, I've played with all of them, and I think they're pretty fun. That's just how it is. Now, overall, I guess the most important question is, should you give Mecha BREAK your time? And I am going to say the same thing that I said 6 months ago, and that is, if you like mechs, of course, yes, we don't have options for this sort of stuff. It's a free game. It's got a very cinematic tutorial introduction sequence that I really enjoyed, that was a big change from the previous one. They really expanded on it and polished it up a lot. But the truth is that there is no real competition in the mech genre, honestly. And if you were telling me that Mecha BREAK wins by default by being the only option, I mean, that is enough to be a compelling reason to play the game, I guess, but that's not the case. It's not just that it wins by default, it's that it's really damn well made. There's a lot of consideration put into it to make it just a fun game overall and to satisfy that mech fantasy. I really liked it before. I like it even more now that it's more polished and caters to more people by adding those different modes. And I really think that, I mean, you're at the end of this video, you're probably already trying it out, let's be honest. I also just want to throw this in here. It's just smart. It's a good example to set forward, man. If you're going to try and make a live service multiplayer game, you want people to come in, have fun, and stick around, do something different. Do something that nobody else is doing. Distinguish yourself from the rest. And I think that Amazing Seasun Games has done exactly that with Mecha BREAK, which means it's going to probably have a pretty good audience that is going to stick around. And I'm just happy that we get to play more mechs. We need more mechs in general. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit the like button. If you want more from me in the world of news, reviews, previews, all sorts of things regarding video games, remember to subscribe. I'm trying to beat GameSpot in subscribers. They're ahead by 5.4 million, but I think we can do it. A special shout out to the patrons up on the $1 patron wall that directly support all of my nonsense. I've been Mug. Go out there, enjoy some great games, maybe even some Mecha BREAK, and I'll see you again very soon.